coming. I'm Alex Chow. I work at the School of Divinity in the University of Edinburgh. I'm a trustee on the Duff Lectureship. You may be wondering, what is the Duff Lectureship? The Duff Lectureship is a lectureship that was established by the family of Alexander Duff, who was a missionary to India from the Church of Scotland. And he was a missionary in the mid-1800s. And he came back, and he was a very important, one of the first Scottish missionaries to India. And the lectureship was established as a way to encourage thinking and bring lecturers to speak on topics related to the spread of Christianity and the shape of Christianity around the world. This is sponsored in part through the Church of Scotland, and as the Duff Lectureships historically have been always Protestant speakers. So this is actually the first time that we've had a Catholic speaker as a Duff lecturer. And so this past week, our speaker, Father Stan Chugilo, was part of an academic conference in Edinburgh, which I was hosting in the school, in School of Divinity, University of Edinburgh. So that was the academic lecture, the lecture that he gave, and it was part of a conference on creation, climate change, and Christianity around the world. Our speaker today is come to Glasgow and is going to give a slightly different lecture, but one related to the similar topic of creation and climate change. Our speaker is the research professor in ecclesiology, world Catholicism, and African studies at the Center for World Catholicism and Intercultural Theology at DePaul University in Chicago. He's also a Catholic priest, ordained in the priesthood in, I cannot pronounce the name of the state, but in Nigeria. Perhaps Father Stan can pronounce it for me. But he was ordained in Nigeria, and he is a very learned man. He has more degrees than I have fingers on one hand. So you can see from his talk his learned background, and he is well written as well. He has 15 books with his name on it, both academic and popular and spiritual writings. Without further ado, I'm going to invite Father Stan Chugilo to the podium to give the talk, Ecological Conversion as Missionary Conversion, a Spirituality of Stewardship for Cosmic Flourishing. Please.
Thank you very much, Alex, for that generous introduction, and thank you, brothers and sisters, for being here this evening. And thank you to Justice and Peace Scotland for organizing this. And thank you, Your Grace, Archbishop Nolan, for being here. And this is my first time in Scotland. I've never been before. I've only read about Scotland in some fairy tales. And I don't want to tell you the Scottish team that I support, because I don't want some of you to leave this hall, the football team that I support, but I might tell you privately that that's what keeps me somehow connected, is the teams that I support. The team, not teams. I have one team that I support here. But I love what I have seen, very generous, nice people, and happy people, play music everywhere, people just entertaining, enjoying, and I feel at home. And I like to begin my conversation with you on the theme of beauty. Beauty. So one of the favorite poems I read as a high school student was William Yeats' The Two Trees, written in 1892. It made a deep impression on me because it etched on my young mind something which has stayed with me since then. This lesson that I learned from this poem is that life, my life, your life, and the life of everyone is beautiful and worth living. Living a fulfilling life is not easy. It is a gift from God which demands our human effort. We must make the choice every day to embrace beauty and reject its contrary. As John Chichester observes, and I quote, "What may be most missing in this highly technological world of ours is beauty. We value efficiency instead. We want functionalism over art. We create trash. We bask in kitsch. But beauty, right proportion in all things, harmony in the universe and in our lives, truth in appearances eludes us. We paint over good wood. We prefer sometimes plastic flowers to wild flowers. We reproduce the pietà in plastic, not the real one. We forgo the natural and the real for the pretentious. We are, as a people, awash in the venom. A loss of commitment to beauty may be the clearest sign, my dear friends, that we are losing our way to God and to one another. Without beauty, we miss the glory of God in the here and now. We are saved in beauty, to use the words of the famous Russian writer Dostoevsky. According to Nicholas Kabasilas, to experience beauty in our lives, we must know and embrace what causes love and gives birth to it. And that is God. We must experience God. To find happiness and mediate happiness to others, you must seek for beauty in your life, in all circumstances and in all people, in nature, in animals. God's love is God's free act to create. A love that saves, a love that creates, and a love that gives. A love that embraces each person into this bosom of divine beauty. A love that forgives and restores. A love that makes us whole. The fruit of God's love is beauty. And the beauty of God's love is a human person fully alive, and the whole earth awash with the glory and majesty and goodness of Almighty God. When God finished the work of creation, as we read from the book of Genesis, God said, "All that I have made is good." Do you read that in your own Bible? God said, "All that I have made is good." And most of us who study classic Catholic theology, philosophy, know the good, the beautiful, the true, and the loving are all one. If it is good, it is beautiful. If it is beautiful and good, it is true. If it is beautiful, good, and true, it is lovely, it's loving, and it's harmonious. So, when God says creation is good, God is saying creation is beautiful. Creation is true, it's not false. What I have made is real. It's not fake. Creation is beautiful from source. But I ask you, do you see beauty around you? Do you see beauty in the world? So I would like to begin this presentation reflecting a bit on beauty, because I think that, like Hans Urs von Balthasar, the Swiss theologian, said, the crisis of our times is the crisis of beauty, the eclipse of beauty. That's the crisis. When you see someone who is hungry, who is ravaged by poverty, what do you see? When you see people drowning, crossing the Mediterranean or the Atlantic, who do you see? Many people who are abandoned in some of our nursing homes, seniors who cared for us, who just left there. Rarely do some people go to see them. Brothers and sisters who are living in jails, prisons, living in your own life. Do you see beauty? I believe that an essential part of our calling today as people who long for a better, peaceful, healthy, and happy world is to begin to find our way back to beauty. And that is what I propose. Missionary and ecological conversion can help us to do. And that's the invitation I'd like to extend to you. And I go back now to the poem by Yeats, The Two Trees. It's a poem set in the Garden of Eden. The two trees represent the tree of knowledge of good and the tree of knowledge of evil. Yeats draws a contrast between the beauty of life and its contrary. He also writes that in the course of the cycle of life, at some point, people may choose to gaze in their hearts and see beauty or the tree of life. And at some time, people may gaze in the bitter glass and see the fatal image which grows through the subtle guile of the devil. Yeats invites the reader to gaze in thine own heart, the holy tree growing there. This holy tree, which represents the burning forth of a human being, is enamored with many beautiful things which one can behold, namely the joy which emerges when the tree buds forth. Some of you are gardeners. When you see the tree, the plant budding forth, like a cycle emerging, like a song with rhymes and rhythm growing in a crescendo from the first note. The merry light, the flaming circle, all reveal a rhythmic music that reflects the tender care which the human eye can behold. The beauty of life is reflected when we gaze on the tree of life that is you, with its roots planted deep in the soil of divine love. This beauty of life is represented in the tree of life that started in each and every one of us as a single seed which God planted in creation. And when God allowed that first cell of your life to be fertilized in your mother's womb, Yeats invite people not to gaze on the bitter glass, as you see in the world today. A lot of people, when they look at the world, they only see negativities, and they become cynical, skeptical, and they're like garbage dump. You know, they can dump that everywhere. But we are ones, we have to clean up this mess in the world, and that's what is a challenge that I leave before you. So when you look at life and the world as a bitter glass, then that is a symbolism that you are losing a sense of beauty. So Yeats writes of the tree of death. It's not characterized by this beauty you see in a garden. What you see, ugliness, fatal images, which grow in an ugly soul, stormy nights, broken boughs and blackened leaves, barrenness and outer woodiness, broken branches, tears, ragged wings, unkindness and cruel claw, among other ugly images that flood the unhappy soul. It is obvious that in these kinds of existence, both the inner and the outer level of our humanity are impoverished, and the fruitfulness and fullness of life are diminished or imperiled by these negative forces. Such forces may make one think that God is no longer present in this life, or as Yeats puts it, the glass of outer wilderness made when God slept in times of old. Now, even though Yeats did not write this poem from a strictly religious perspective, his poem helps me to capture, even in an imperfect way, a deep religious wisdom on the two ways in which most people live and the contrasting images of a good creation made good by God and the bad creation made bad by the abuse and violation of human freedom and the choices we are making today in our world. So you may ask, who did this to us? Who brought this upon creation? The world is not a battlefield between the forces of good and those of evil. This is a typically what you call Manichaean view, which feeds into some violent and destructive response to evil by so-called defenders of the good, who wish to eviscerate the enemies of God. This oppositional or dialectical way of looking at life and reality is a residue in the Western world of some versions of thought, which go back to the ancient Greek thinkers and pagan religions of feuding and vengeful gods, witches and wizards, and faceless and invisible malevolent forces wandering in the night like small demons destroying the earth and its inhabitants. We can look at life differently, and we can act differently. And what I present to you in the rest of this talk is a spirituality of looking at life as beautiful and developing the courage to confront the challenges and threats facing us in the climate crisis that we face. So let me take you to my place of birth. I come from the ancient Igbo community of Aceh in eastern Nigeria. When a child is born, the umbilical cord, I hope that's the correct thing, this one here, is that what you call that? It's going to take me more days and weeks to develop a Scottish accent, you know, and I'd love to do that over time. So the umbilical cord, like mine, was usually buried in the ground and a tree planted over it. This was to show the bond between all things and to underline the belief that life is like a single tree and that the human person is earthy, bound completely with nature and the entire cosmos as a participant. In ancient times, in my community, it was by observing these trees that people determined the age of people. They didn't have a calendar. They just go to the ancestral grove. If my tree is longer than yours, he say, yeah, I am the older. Or they cut into the cambion layer. You see that layer around? That's how they know your age. So They could verify this by looking at these ancestral trees. Growing up in my ancestral home in West Africa, it was really a moving and mystical moment for us as children when we walked in the green and surreal ancestral grove that we call Ohono, means finding your roots back to your ancestor, Ohono. Visiting our trees of life and those of our late ancestors, we walked in this very beautiful scene. There was some mystical presence in this ancestral grove, and a feeling of harmony and peace as one listened to the chirping sounds of the birds, the melodious sounds of the tree branches as they were dancing in the wind, the hissing sound of reptiles, and the gentle and gingerly walk of many tortoises, those ancient totem animals reverenced by the ancient kingdom of Aceh in eastern Nigeria. These days, these ancestral groves, like last time I was home, are being destroyed as people cut down trees, burn these trees to build homes, inevitably destroying these links which were so reverenced by the ancestors of our ancient kingdom. The metaphor of the tree of life takes us back to our roots, to the beginning of creation. It invites us to beauty, to harmony and peace in creation. It reminds us of our history and the blessing which comes through our human and cosmic history as God's gracious gift. This is what many African cultures often represented by the word Ubuntu. I exist through others, through the earth, through the water, through the animals. I am related, therefore I exist. I am a full participant in the web of life when I am loved, when I am accepted, and when I respect others and respect nature and the world around me. So this is like a cosmic liturgy. When I walk in that ancestral grove, it's like a cosmic liturgy. The animals, the birds, everyone moving peacefully. Even in that ancestral grove, because in my community, they reverence these animals. Like you go there, none of them will harm you. Like the snakes, I don't know why no one has ever been beaten there. They kind of get used to each other. The snakes think you are my friend, you are my neighbor. The alligators, no one has ever been eaten. There's no recorded. So I said, why is that? There's some harmony there that, now when I go home, I feel this pain. Dear friends, there is a symphony and a peace in creation which emerge when there is a just, loving, and respectful order maintained through the recognition of the value, dignity, and beauty of all creatures, of every human being. We all are like priests celebrating a cosmic liturgy in which, through Him, with Him, and in Him, we are preserving and promoting beauty, which is the essential character of God's glory in history. I want to tell you a few things about Africa. I have stories here that I will just tell you one that can lead us then into ecological and missionary conversion. So my speech is reverse psychology. So I start with beauty and I end with ecological and missionary conversion. So when we think of what happened in Nigeria, my home country, just last year, and the whole of the African Sahel, I guess you all know, and I like English poems, so forgive me, I studied English literature before I went into studying philosophy and theology. So Samuel Taylor Coleridge's poem, you know that the rhyme of the ancient mariner. Everyone here knows that. Water, water everywhere, not a drop to drink. I use this title to tell the story of the flooded rivers that created so much suffering in Nigeria and in many other countries in the African Sahel in 2022. According to Hindu Umaru Ibrahim, an expert on the adaptation and mitigation of indigenous peoples to climate change, who belongs to the Mbororo pastoralist people in Chad, and president of the Association for Indigenous Women and Peoples of Chad. She said, "I get my energy from my people. I can go to all the biggest cities of the world, but I always have to go back to my community. Drink the water they are drinking from the lake or the rivers. Sit down on the ground with them, talking with them, listening to how they are dealing with every single day in their life gives me more energy to just get out and do what I have to do. My people never stop, so I will never stop." Why was this woman looking for energy and communal support? Because his community, like many communities in West Africa, had gone through near apocalyptic cycle of severe drought and then severe flooding. So many people were dying of hunger and starvation last year, and those who were feeling that they have lost their life, lost their lives, many of them, through the marauding gangs of fighters and militia who kidnap, maim, rape, and kill so many people, especially women, in these vast plains of the African Sahel that looks more like an archipelago of ungoverned spaces. Marauding, mainly Islamic militants, killing so many people. According to World Weather Attribution, with at least 612 fatalities, the 2022 flood in my country, Nigeria, and the African Sahel was the deadliest ever. It was worse than the previous devastating flood that occurred in Nigeria in 2012, because in this case, 34 out of 36 states of Nigeria, over 3.2 million people were affected, with 1.5 million people displaced and nearly 3,000 people injured and needing treatment. The flooding inundated several hundreds of thousands of hectares of land and over 500,000 hectares of farmland, and damaged more than 300,000 homes, schools, industrial complexes, and public utilities and health facilities. It's still occurring as we speak now. And the government, just like during COVID-19, has not provided anything, no palliatives, to mitigate the devastating impact of this flood. So, World Weather Attribution conducted several research with people from Nigeria, Cameroon, India, the Netherlands, France, Denmark, South Africa, US, the UK, and analyzed what extent human-caused climate change has altered the likelihood and intensity of the rainfall that inundated most of sub-Saharan Africa last year. So they concluded that the flooding was the result of an above-average rainfall throughout 2022 rainy season, exacerbated by shorter spikes of very heavy rain, leading to flash floods as well as riverine floods. They used different models. These researchers came to the conclusion that both for the 7 days maximum rainfall over the lower Niger Basin and the seasonal rain over the Lake Chad Basin, it showed an increase in intensity of extreme rainfall as a result of climate change that made the event about twice as likely. I just want to give you just one example out of many. Reflecting on how these unpredictable weather patterns affect the livelihood of the poor in sub-Saharan Africa, Hindu Umaru says, coming from pastoral communities where our life depends on nature, we are living climate change in our daily life. Rain is a very important part of our life. When rains come, it is food for our cattle, for ourselves. And then when our cattle eat the grass, it helps them to get more milk. It is all we have for our economy. When we don't have enough rain, it impacts food insecurity and social life, where it creates conflict between the communities fighting to access natural resources and internal migration in displacement of the people. It has an environmental, social, and economic impact on the community, unquote. This is just an example of the ugliness that we see all around us that contradicts the beauty that God made all of us, all our world. The words of Hindu, the tears and cries of millions of Nigerians, millions of West Africans, and millions of people all over the world. I could give you examples of these events in the United States, in the UK, it's all over. Their cry resonated a little during the last COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh, that's last year in Egypt. At the end, just like when they were here in Scotland, they make all these commitments. So last year, the international community accepted to set up a special fund for responding to loss and damages suffered by countries in Africa and the least industrialized countries. A transitional committee was set up to work out who will contribute to the fund, how much will be contributed, and which of the G17 countries are eligible to receive help. G77 countries are eligible to receive help from the fund, and then the administrative structures of the fund. That was now close to 8 months. However, this was not the first time they decided who will set up fund, who will take care of mitigation and adaptation in Africa and the rest of the other countries and continents who are the least polluters. But over 30 years of negotiation, nothing really has happened. Nothing. Even since last year, nothing has happened with the 100 billion Green Climate Fund set up in 2010. Anyone here knows what it has accomplished? Zero. But perhaps the last commitment last year was the highest, the most extensive by the international community. It signified a universal consensus that there is the need for climate justice in the world for most countries in the global south, particularly in Africa, who are the least polluters, but who are the most affected by the pollution and the emission from the industrialized nations like the US and China, the two most polluting nations. But this account, as I speak with you, is an empty bank account. There's no money there. And going by previous failed commitments and failed international development intervention in Africa and many other places, there's no guarantee that this commitment will be kept. No one knows when this money will be available, and the actionable mechanism that Africans can use if the money is not available. Do our continent sue the UK, sue you guys, Scotland or something? No one. You make a law and there's no actionable consequences. So it is not a law. What gets measured gets done. So how do you measure that it's done? Nothing. No framework was put in place, and we have been at this since Paris 2012. To keep global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius and reduce greenhouse emission. That was not advanced in COP27 as they talked about setting up this fund. So COP27 did not offer any concrete and immediate solution to the flooding in my homeland. It did not offer any solution to millions of Nigerians in the oil-rich Delta region submerged in flood waters, polluted airs, water, and farmlands. What will they get from this empty bank account? Nothing. So as many people in Africa go through this climate change-induced changes in seasonal patterns of rainfall and dryness in the African Sahel, in the Rift region, there is then the question about climate injustice and the layer of structural violence that many poor people suffer in Africa and in the world today, caused by carbon emission, poor garbage disposal, rapid urbanization, and destruction of natural habitats, to mention a few. There is the need for churches in Africa, as well as the rest of the world, to rise to this challenge through advocacy. Most often, little attention is paid to the assets of people in Africa. Why people focus on needs of Africa without addressing the structural nature that creates that needs, that goes back to over 500 years, beginning with slavery and the subsequent destruction of these economies that is ongoing even till date. We don't have time today that I could show you through research how the diseases that we find in Africa, when you think of the movement of people during the slave trade, you can think of how many infectious diseases were brought into Africa by this movement of human beings back and forth across 3 continents. So there is the need to speak out also against African governments in their corruption and insensitivity that have become internal colonialists against their own people, and to speak up against international policies and programs that continue to worsen climate change and drown its impact through toxic charity and dead aid from humanitarian groups from the West to Africa that continues to fuel a dependency cycle in Africa. So we must commit ourselves to addressing some of these challenges. But the question is, how can you address this problem unless you recognize it as a problem? And this leads me to the final part of my presentation, a call from Pope Francis for ecological and missionary conversion. The church exists to carry out the mission of God. But the church cannot carry out this mission faithfully and credibly except if the church is attentive to what God is saying. The signs of the times, like Gaudium et Spes pointed out. At the beginning of this new millennium, Pope St. John Paul II, in Duc in Altum, reminded the church that what is needed today is not a new plan. What is needed today is a deeper immersion into God's plan, discovering the face of Jesus in the face of one another, and to discover our wounded and broken humanity in the suffering and pains of our times. So mission is God's plan, not ours. So I want every one of us here to remember this. God does not need any of us in order to bring this mission about. Sometimes we behave like we are the Lord of the manor. You know the story of Samuel and Eli. You know the story. Samuel had the voice of God, but he didn't know it was the voice of God. He would run to Eli and say, "You called me master." He said, "No, I didn't call you." And then Eli, the man of God, says to Samuel, next time you hear the voice, say, "Speak, Lord. Your servant is listening." I think today we are reversing that even in our church. Rather than say, "Speak, Lord, your servant is listening," we say, "Listen, Lord, your servant is speaking." God, this is what we want to get done here. So out of God's generosity, God allows us to participate in this mission of taking care of the earth, of taking care of our lives, and taking care of each other. Like Mother Teresa never ceases to remind us, God has no more hands but our hand to heal the sick. God has no more mouths but our mouths to speak of for those who are condemned to die. God has no more legs but our legs to visit the sick, to visit prisoners, the homeless. So I emphasize strongly that in order to commit ourselves to stewardship of creation, we need to overcome the temptations of our modern times that elevate the human above God. Sometimes we might think that it is all about us and what we want for the church and our world, but it's not our church, it's God's church. So we should say, God, what do you want for your church? How can I be part of it? Not, God, this is our plan for your church. We want you to be part of it. We must reverse this tendency that I call a tendency to idolatry, a new form of idolatry. The danger of the idolatry of the self, of religion, of nation, of race, the idolatry that we human beings are the best thing that ever happened, that we came here late. Other creations were here before us, other creatures. And the pride of self that ruins pastoral life. So, how can we come to this realization? Missionary conversion. And here, I will speak through the writings of Pope Francis. Pope Francis calls on all of us to embrace a missionary and ecological conversion. Let me talk briefly about missionary conversion. And that means that we turn toward God and our neighbors. That's classic Augustinian writing, that sin is to turn toward the self. But conversion is to turn toward God and your neighbor. Because sin is when you focus on love of self to the forgetfulness of God and the rest of creation. So, the Pope invites us to become bold and creative in the task of rethinking the goals, the structure, the style, and method of evangelization in our respective communities. Pope Francis writes, and I quote, "I dream of a missionary option, that is, a missionary impulse capable of transforming everything so that the church's customs, way of doing things, times and schedules, language and structures can be suitably channeled for the evangelization of today's world rather than for her self-preservation. The renewal of structures demanded by pastoral conversion can only be understood in this light as part of an effort to make them more missional-oriented," unquote. Pope Francis uses many powerful images to capture this missionary conversion. He says, we need a church unafraid of going forth into the night. We need a church capable of meeting people where they are. We need a church capable of entering into conversation like we are having the synodal moment now. We need a church able to dialogue, because there are many people who are wandering aimlessly like those two disciples on the way to Emmaus, not knowing their direction. Can the church meet them like Jesus met these two disciples and reveal to them the face of God in the breaking of bread? So, like von Balthasar, who I really like his work so much, says the center of the world and the center of the church has to be found in the revelation of the Son of God, who is the principle of divine love and the face of God. And how you do that is when we allow the crystallization of love that happens when the church is interested not in the church's power and privilege, but where the church is found. This I have discussed in my book, A Poor and Merciful Church, that where the church is found today is where the church's validity, authenticity, and credibility is to be found as well. If it's a church that hangs out with poor people, a poor church for the poor and with the poor, well, That's what the poor man of Galilee did. If the church is found with those on the margins of society, those who are discarded, those who are expendable, that shows that the church is living like Jesus. If the church is found healing this broken earth, fighting against climate change and all kinds of destructive tendencies we find in our world today, that will show that the church is truly reading the signs of the times. So missionary conversion will call for a radical change of outlook, a change of vision, a change of mission, and it will require the church engaging critically with the ideologies of power that we have in the world today and narratives of exclusion that says that technological determinism or relativism, materialism, the idol of money and neoliberal capitalism that Pope Francis says are economies that kill, that produce body bags, economies that eviscerate the poor, where the poor are getting poorer and the rich are getting richer. So true are the words of Mother Teresa, that humanity has healed, seems to have conquered many sicknesses. One sickness that the world has not conquered is the fact that there are millions of our brothers and sisters who are dying of poverty, dying of preventable and treatable diseases because of where they are born and where they live and where they are growing. And that leads me to ecological conversion, which is rooted in the same, is the foundation of ecological conversion and the foundation of missionary conversion is what the Lord says, turning toward God. When we turn toward God, do we see, like the psalm said, the heavens proclaim the glory of the Lord, and the firmament speaks of God's glory. What do we see in the ugliness of climate change, flooded cities? What do we see in the heating of this earth? So it is a call that we realize the sinfulness and destructive effects of our individual, group, and global practices that have harmed creation. The reason for the climate crisis is because of the choices people are making, both as individuals and as communities. And so Pope Francis is inviting us to find the link between addressing climate change and ecological crisis and the mission of proclaiming the word of God. Go out to the whole nations, proclaim the good news. But that conversion begins with the constant word that Pope Francis uses, awareness, seeing, touching. Is an invitation to awe, to reverence the presence of God. Is also, again, an invitation to a Trinitarian communion, to see in the Trinity the inner structure that we find in the Trinity, how the three persons work together. Love, sharing, cooperation, solidarity, collaboration, participation. Isn't that what integral ecology is all about? That all things hold together. Everything hold together. Just like the Trinity is one. So also, the way we treat the planet also shows how we treat each other. The way we treat each other in the church can only reflect how the Trinity treats each other, if you like. How Jesus, the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit, they work together. And they live together. And together, they made everything come into being. Our faith tells us that creation came as a result of the intimate bond and relationship between the three divine persons. This intimate and intricate web of relationship that is inseparable and indistinguishable is a mystery. Integral ecology is also an Ubuntu spirituality that is grounded, modeled, and reflected in the life of the Trinity. Creation being the gift from God and bearing God's imprint and nature is a unity We are all summoned in humility before this creation, in loving tenderness, as guardians of creation and guardians of one another. I started with talking about beauty. Permit me to conclude with beauty. Pope Francis invites us to a culture of encounter as the answer to the crisis of our modern times, the crisis of relationship with each other, relationship with nature. The culture of encounter is a diagnostic moment that helps us to see what is wrong with how we treat each other. Because when you look at the other, who do you see? You know, I think it's Jean-Paul Sartre that said, hell is other people. But Emmanuel Levinas says, the face of the other calls me to be. When I see you, I see myself. When I see nature, I see myself. So I invite you to develop a contemplative mind. When you go before the Blessed Sacrament, that could be a small beginning. What do you see? When you walk through the garden, let us begin to see beauty. Let us have the openness of heart, the spiritual encounter that comes from purified eyes that can see, that can be touched, eyes that can cry about the nakedness of our humanity that is shown every day in the unacceptable suffering and pain of so many lives. People excluded from our churches, people who are neglected, people who are abandoned, and our bleeding and fragile earth. Yes, we may see ourselves as coming from different roads, but our present journey in this earth, our common home, must now converge to a common destiny. For we have no separate future. We all have one common future. Our pathway to arriving there is the path of beauty. Every day, conversion, changing your outlook, committing yourself to say no to the darkness, say, I beg to differ. I must do something beautiful for God. So I thank you for your commitment to make this world a better place, for the sacrifices you make, for your prayers, for your tears, for your pains, and for your anguish. Many of you have stood strong, have worked so hard. You think about the world beyond you, and you model, for many of us, the face of Jesus Christ. This wounded and broken world is in need of hope. And the world is a much better place because of people like you. I know there are many things you could be doing this evening, enjoying the Scottish Scotch somewhere this evening. Yeah, you decided to be here. So let us hold each other's hands in a spirit of love and respect. I pray that you all may see beauty in all you do. May you have the courage to wake up every day committed to seeing beauty and becoming beautiful, helping to remove the dark spots around our common home so that all of us will help God to make the words of Scripture true for us, for you, for me, and for entire humanity. The words that say, O Lord, our God, how beautiful are your works in all the earth, and all flesh shall one day see the glory of the Lord as the waters cover the sea. Thank you very much.